Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Quinyon Scott, and I am here with
Christina Cook.
And we're coming to you today just doing a series. So we thought about principal, teacher, and we've been working together collaboratively, specifically after the pandemic, and just wanted to share with you just some thoughts about how we were able to successfully move into a remote learning plan, but more importantly, just the feeling and perspective is that as we move into the fall, how does the principal feel? And then from a teacher's perspective, and what are some needs that both the teacher and the principal have to work with? So what we're going to talk about is, which is actually we've been grappling with, right, what we're actually going to talk about. And we talked about what's the price of going back to work and understanding what the value of your life is versus your job. Cook, talk about just the pandemic and what's been the process for you just outside of work.
Mm-hmm. So I am a single parent with 3 kids who are home during the pandemic. So not only am I responsible for making sure the kids that I teach are educated and taken care of and are healthy, I also have the responsibility of being home with my 3 children, making sure that I'm monitoring and taking care of their mental state. So to be honest, it's been difficult, if I'm transparent with you today. It's been really hard managing their mental health plus my own.
Yeah, and I was thinking about that. You know, mental health is so important. And from a principal standpoint, like, how do I help you with that?
Right.
Can you think about, as we were going through just coming up with the short-term plan and the long-term plan, what were some things that I could have done or some needs that the school could have met?
So I don't feel like there was anything in that moment you could have done because none of us were expecting this to happen. I think the biggest thing is you checked in on a daily basis what people needed. And so you were open about what was going on. You were also open about how you felt, which made me feel comfortable being vulnerable to share how I was personally feeling outside of the work we were doing at school.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. So one of the things from a school leader's perspective that we did was that we had 8:15 check-in calls every single day. That check-in call varied. It was from doing brain teasers, enlisting instructional strategies. So we went from identifying Zoom as our virtual platform, Google Classroom as our digital platform. And so how do you move throughout those learning management tools ongoingly? And it was also for a way for people to just often share how they felt. So that was good. And then Cook is also a department chair. Our department chairs checked in every day from 8:30 to 9 o'clock. And in full transparency, right, a lot of times there was really nothing to check in about specifically toward the end of the year. But it was an opportunity for us to engage with one another, to us to have a pulse and temperature check of how things are going. How do you feel about teachers and principals will have to talk about PPE? So before you had to have Lysol in your classroom, but Lysol was at your own discretion. Now there's going to have to be an agenda for Lysol, Clorox wipes. How do you wipe off your desk? How do you feel about that transition?
So I think it begs the question about how do we manage that with students who may have allergies or students who, I don't know how I want to phrase it, but typically, like if you were overly clean in your classroom, students would think you thinking they smell bad, and that's not it. You're just looking to keep the germs down. So I'm wondering, like, how do we manage that for students with allergies? How do we manage the cost of doing that? Because as Dr. Scott alluded to, those things were extra. If I wanted Clorox wipes in my room, I just would purchase them, and that's how I would have them. So I think I'm just wondering, what does that look like now, knowing that when I could initially hug a student without thinking about any germs, now I have to think twice, and then I have to wipe everything. An environment now where we'll be more high tech and less high touch with families.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. So you mentioned two things. So one is just the cost, right? Mm-hmm. So we know that teachers have a huge cost associated with materials. So I'm thinking of wall materials, mm-hmm. vocabulary word walls, mm-hmm. making sure you have enough markers, making sure you have enough pens. But now the conversation is evolving to making sure you have enough health and cleaning supplies. Yeah. And so definitely the school has its onus of making sure that you have enough supplies. Mm-hmm. That's one financial fee. Mm-hmm. But in many cases, if you choose to wipe down your desk every 15 minutes, mm-hmm. the school may only supply, and this is hypothetical, right? Yeah. Nothing has come up, but the school may only decide to give you enough for mm-hmm. you to wipe down your desk twice a day. Mm-hmm. And so now you have a huge cost that you now have to incur mm-hmm. that impacts the budget of your family and your 3 children. Have you thought about changing your budget, mm-hmm. or what's the impact of that's going to be for your household and returning back to school?
Yeah, so honestly, I'm looking at all of y'all out there in TV land. Support a teacher. I may start a GoFundMe and label it Lysol Wipes. But I'm just
Lysol Wipes. Okay.
I'm just thinking like it now is a part of my curriculum, like having materials, reading materials, writing materials are part of my curriculum. I'm just adding that in. But I'm gonna tell you something that is also making me think. If I have to interrupt instruction every 15 minutes to wipe down, I'm wondering, will I continue to get the traction I need to now advance learning? Because now we talk about cleaning everybody up, but we have to constantly keep everyone clean. How do we manage that in a 57-minute block, or some people a 90-minute block, and still keep that sense of community?
Yeah, that's important. And the other thing you mentioned is high touch. Mm-hmm. So we saw on social media where you have teachers that stand at the door, mm-hmm. they high five their students, they hug their students, they have special bumps for their students. And so this has become a huge phenomenon on relationship building and engagement strategy. And so now we go from encouraging adults to have these quality relationships with students to now it's we can't touch. Correct. Or instead of having our hand touch, we have like blink signals, like blink twice, I like you, or I'm, having a bad time, mm-hmm. so, I close my eyes. So having to come up with these other creative measures where the truth of the matter is kids come to us because they need that.
They do.
They need the hug. They depend on their teachers oftentimes, or even other members of the community just to embrace them. Yeah. And then in our community, we have students that embrace each other.
They do.
So how do we prevent that from happening? Because you still have this theory that some people don't even believe that COVID is real.
Yeah. So I think it forces teachers to now find a more creative way to do what we always do, right? To get a message or point across to students in a way that they can stomach it. So, as Dr. Scott said, I was one of those teachers high-fiving kids, elbowing kids, hugging kids, doing the whoa with kids. So I'm thinking maybe we'll make more dance moves for kids. We'll find this another language where we use our bodies to communicate so we don't lose that emotion that we really need. So I see, a rise in anxiety for children. So I think I'm interested in asking you, just wondering, like, how do we now deal with that as a leader in a school where you have an influx of kids who are struggling now with anxiety and you need to speak to the counselor more often than not? What impact do you think that's going to have with the main point, which is driving instruction?
Yeah, so I'm thinking of we're going to have to Maslow first, and how do we ensure that we're meeting students' needs first before we can do anything else? That's one point. Another point is with anxiety. I think anxiety is going to be for all stakeholders. So I'm thinking of families who don't want their children to come back into the environment, and so they're afraid of once their children come back into the public arena, what's the impact of them bringing home that virus home, especially if there's other children in the home. The other part I'm thinking of is that, from a teacher administrative perspective, I still have anxiety about, what does reentry really what does reentry look like?
Yeah.
You know, is that truly what many restaurants are doing, where they're taking your temperature as you come in, or as long as you come in and you have your mask on, but you won't have to have your mask on throughout the entire day?
Yeah.
And so is that a breach in safety? What are the true concerns? So I think that as much as we talk about children anxiety, as a leader, part of the resolve that I think that we really have to have is, how do we deal with my anxiety, right? And how do I begin to identify what's needed for me?
Yeah.
And then once I can come to grips with what I need and what's available for me, then how do I ensure that all the teachers are equipped for what they need?
Yeah.
And then how do we begin to have honest conversations about the emotional needs?
Yeah.
Because for most adults, I say, hey, how you doing? And you say,
I'm all right.
I'm fine,
Yeah.
right? And so how do you become reflective enough that you're able to tell a true conversation about how you feel?
Yeah.
Because the truth is, unless you show up well, right? You and your colleagues,
Yeah.
me and my colleagues, if we don't show up well, we're not going to be well for children.
I agree. And I think maybe there's a space now really for the restorative work, where we could sit and maybe have more community meetings around how we're feeling. And that now becomes commonplace in the environment as part of our curriculum and not just a one-off.
Yeah, and you know, restorative work is necessary, but you figure we have a month and a half before we go into re-entry phase. And for many schools, they haven't really touched restorative.
Right.
And so at our school, we've done restorative work around, I would say, one of the lifelines, so circling, but it's still restorative. It's such a mind shift.
Yeah, it is.
And how do you begin to shift the mind of people who they don't even acknowledge that they're not fine? And so what does that look like? Because acknowledging that I'm not fine means that I am being honest and transparent. But if I don't trust you, why would I be honest with you?
I agree.
And so it becomes really difficult to have this conversation of how can I support your need when the truth of the matter is you don't want to share your need with me.
Correct. I agree.
And I think the same thing with students. How do you, in a short amount of time, especially for new students coming into a school, for new families, it's going to be the onus on us, right, as school leaders, to make sure that we strengthen that trust, and we strengthen that trust immediately.
Yeah.
I think restorative justice is right on top, but I also think we probably need to move back to, does the school meet all the needs first?
Right.
Because for many years, the school is a place for meals. The school is a place for health. So, and you have some schools that they do an entire physical and they meet the whole child. So if that's the case, counseling, social emotional support, so SEL has become huge in schools. Community needs have become huge in schools. I'm thinking about when I was principal at the Academy for College and Career Exploration, and we had a partnership where Maryland Food Bank would deliver 20 pounds of food every week to the school.
Wow.
For the community.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so it was more than just a school.
Yeah, it was a family.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it was a place where whatever your needs were met. So we used the food bank as a way of building trust for the community. So school leaders will have to identify what are the needs of their audience and then continue to build trust. What do you think is the number one thing that a leader could do to begin to build trust with staff?
So I think that's loaded, right? Because
hey, we're here for loaded.
So I think it's loaded because people sometimes have their own baggage and outside issues that just impact their ability to trust, and it has nothing to do with the leader, right? It's that self-work. So I feel like leaders have their task, they're charged with the responsibility of figuring out what's in it for that particular person, right? And that's one thing Dr. Scott is really good at. She's good at recruiting and finding the best people she can, and then she gets the best out of them by allowing them to shine where they are strong. And so I think that's one of the things that a leader can do is allow your people to shine where they are, right? Let them develop right where you see their need, and not necessarily force people into places and spaces where maybe they're not ready to go yet.
That's good. And do you think, I was also thinking about, for the person who wants to step into a role of support or even have ideas, what's a way where they can communicate those ideas without necessarily saying, oh, over the summer, I'm going to call my principal?
Yeah, so I think an email or maybe a card, a letter, or even starting an initiative and then sharing with your leader, hey, I tried this with my cousins or my family and I saw that this worked. And I think we're at a stage where we need all solutions, right? We don't need any more problems. And so I feel like anything you can bring to the table for schools, whether it's your finances, your other types of resources, like that's what we stand in the need of as teachers. So for those listening in who have friends and family members who are teachers, I'm going to tell you what they need. Clorox wipes, pencils, notebooks, like those kind of things. You can send it to their homes or send it to their schools if you know, and we'll be really grateful for those things.
Yeah, one of the things that I've envisioned, whether or not we actually go back into the schoolhouse or whether we go back to virtual remote learning, is that just like we rooted for graduating seniors and 8th graders and 5th graders and kindergartners, and there were parades of people providing them accolades.
Yeah.
But it would be great to have parades of people saying, I have a bottle of Clorox wipes, I have a bottle of Lysol, I have something that can contribute to the school, because even if you're home, we know that it's still a huge need.
Yeah.
I'm also thinking about the number of teachers that were responsible for creating and designing classrooms.
Oh, absolutely.
So Google Classroom is an empty slate,
Yeah.
and teachers were responsible for actually creating and designing graphically the Google Classroom for those that used it. I mean, definitely lots of platforms.
Yeah.
You know, we could have used Blackboard, Canvas, Schoology. We identified Google Classroom really for 2 reasons. One is the cost.
Yep.
And the other was that people were really familiar with what Google
Yeah.
Classroom looked like, but there was another huge cost, and the cost was that you had teachers who never designed a classroom before, and they were forced to design the classroom, and they had to use their own resources, right? So if you didn't have chart paper, or if you didn't have construction paper, or a wide variety of markers, pencils, pens, then you were scrambling, trying to use your own things, ordering from Amazon. And so I'm thinking of like, how can schools help teachers to replenish what they've already spent?
Yeah, I think part of it, to your point, is just acknowledging that teachers do use their own resources to fund their classrooms. I think there was a myth that's provided for you. You're blessed if you're in a school system where you get chart paper, you get markers, and I'm definitely blessed because I've had that experience. But all the extra bells and whistles that I've ever wanted in my room, I had to either take it from my own kids at home and take it to my classroom or purchase it. And so I think number one is acknowledging that there's lack there, right? A lack of resources, a lack of funding in those areas of a classroom. And especially when you now have to be virtual, you really have to get creative. Because you're trying to make this magnetic connection over a screen. And so that involves a couple more steps than I would normally use if I was seeing kids face to face every day physically.
And the level of preparation.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So, you know, oftentimes when you've been teaching for a long time, right? So in between us, we have clearly close to 40 years in the game. And interesting enough that when you are comfortable with, right, this is what I can do and I can do it well, as a result, what you intend to do is you wing it sometimes. But when you're doing Google Classroom and the information has to be online, you can't wing it. You have to prepare the questions. You have to ensure the questions are available. And even for virtual, you still have to make sure that there's this alignment between virtual, what you're actually teaching and showing them, and then making sure it was available digital.
I agree.
Talk about the process for you of how was it planning, right? So you have 3 children. They all had work to do.
Yes.
And it was crucial
Yeah.
because not only do you have males, but they're at transitional phases. You know,
Yeah.
I'm thinking about David, who's in kindergarten,
Right.
If he don't get it, he in trouble, you know? So,
Right.
and then your mandate of, for most of you know, a lot of state testing was canceled.
Yeah.
But Cook teaches advanced placement.
Yes.
And students still had to take AP tests. And that still was a part of what was going to be for our school end of the year.
Yeah.
So you had a lot of planning to do. Talk about what steps you did to help organize planning so that you were successful.
Yeah, so it was twofold. The first step in that process was figuring out what in the curriculum could be scrapped, because we just couldn't get to it. And so that's another challenge teachers had, is trying to figure out, how do I maximize instruction, give kids those skills they're going to be tested on so they can, advance and move to the next level. So in a virtual space where you have multiple classes, multiple preps, I had to literally figure out what were my top 5 standards that no matter what happened, whether we re-entered or not in the fall, kids could say without a shadow of a doubt they had those skills. And so that planning looked like hours of going through curriculum and materials and seeing what was available online. Because when you can't print and give your kid a copy of Macbeth, I had to find the best copy online that was free, because that's another cost. Dr. Scott mentioned, not everything is free to download. And then I had to be able to provide them with a side-by-side copy of a translation of a text. And so in addition to preparing all those materials, I had to always make sure that my technology was working. Because the worst thing that could happen is you're hosting class and boom, your Wi-Fi is gone, or something happens, because the technology now becomes your class. So we're in a traditional setting, the room became my classroom and my platform, and I could manipulate all spaces in my room. The technology, that platform became the driving force for kids to get instruction. And so it just meant I was very deliberate and intentional about what I was putting in front of them, because I only had a small window of time to work with them and to get them to respond and to feel at the end, I had an exit ticket, right? I could say, hey, we started class with this standard. At the end of that Zoom, can you all do that skill and that standard together? And that was a task. But I will say this, Dr. Scott, it forced me to slow all the way down. Not to compromise the quality of the instruction, but to really make sure that I delivered exactly what I said I was going to give them within that 30-minute period.
Yeah, so one of the things, I just want to go into details about what you're sharing. So we decided, March 13th, we left school thinking we would have 2 weeks off. And 2 weeks turned into 3 months. We had a short-term plan. The short-term plan was, prior to students leaving, all students in all content areas received packets. Those packets were about 5 hours worth of work. The goal was that we would have 3 weeks of packets, and we felt that would be more than enough. We then uploaded those packets to our school website to ensure that students really had everything they needed, even if they weren't in school that particular day. Well, after we realized that we would be way more than 3 weeks, we then went into a long-term plan. That long-term plan consisted of researching what remote learning management tools we would use. We identified 2 learning management systems. The first one was virtual. So we identified Zoom, and we ensured that teachers would go from having a 57-minute class in person to a 30-minute class Zoom, where students would learn new information, new skills, and have an opportunity to check in with students 30 minutes 2 times per week. So teachers had a huge lift with adjusting their pacing guides, going from daily instruction every single day to then having just 2 30-minute minutes every single week. In addition to the virtual learning, we also did digital learning. The digital learning was where we utilized the Google Classroom.
Yeah.
And so ideally, the goal was that teachers would have at least 3 hours of work on Google Classroom every single week, where students would have an opportunity to work asynchronous, where they could learn on their own. They can actually go on a Google Classroom. They can identify the work that they missed, and they can have everything that they needed. And so that was actually a huge lift, just identifying what would we do with remote learning, what was going to be our process, making sure teachers had everything they needed, so providing professional development for teachers to ensure that they could utilize Zoom, they could utilize Google Classroom, and then coming up with an accountability system and measurement tools so that we can say on an ongoing basis, did it work, did it not work? So over the next 3 weeks, we are going to be coming to you, sharing with what we did. So I'm thinking of like next week we can actually share like what did it look like, and how do we go through the process of identifying for the remote learning process, the digital and the virtual platform. Before we go though, I really want you to share with everyone any concerns you have moving forward. So we talked about you have 3 children. They go to 2 different schools. And so with you leaving the home, what could be the impact of, are you anticipating anything? Are you anxious about anything?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So that's what I grapple with every day, right? How do I, if schools reopen, transition back and my kids have to be home doing remote? And I think it's a question that a lot of mothers have to ask and answer for themselves. And for me, I can't do a successful job with students if my own children aren't taken care of. So I'm not quite sure at this moment what that transition looks like. I certainly don't feel comfortable leaving my kids home on a computer to work if I have to transition back to a building. So I'm in prayer about it, and hopefully we'll come to a solution. The government, the districts, the school superintendents, where remote learning could become a part of just our everyday norm, just like wearing a mask is. Because to Dr. Scott's point about families who don't want their children to return back to school, what other option do they have? So I'm feeling like homeschooling has become the new norm. We'll see.
Yeah, so are so important. If you have not ordered your PPE materials yet, please do so. Also, if you haven't done an end of the year reflection tool for your team or your staff, please consider doing that as well. This is a great opportunity for you just to determine, did what we do work, right? Was it successful? And looking at stakeholders, so thinking about families, enlisting them, enlisting teachers, and enlisting the students on whether or not the efforts that you put in from March to date, did it work or did it not? That's going to be so essential for the reentry plan, because people want to feel like you care.
Yeah.
And if people don't feel like you closed out properly or you cared, it's going to carry over for when it's time to reentry. And people are going to harbor feelings about, if they would have did this, or I had expectations of them doing this, and because they didn't do this, I feel like this. So until next week, we look forward to you joining us. Don't forget to like, share, love, and let people know that we'll be back next Monday at 12 o'clock. Talk to you soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.